Hello everyone. I hope everybody can hear me and can see me well. Uh, I'd like to welcome all of you on our webinar with our special guest David Maldo from Let's Do Video. Today, David will show you how to create and deliver an exciting and impactful webinars. My name is Oscar and I'm an outreach and PR specialist here at ClickMeeting. I'll be moderating your webinar today. What have we planned for you? First, David will show you his presentation about how to create a great presentation, a great webinars, and it should last about half an hour. And after that, we will have 15-minute Q&A session. So if you have any questions regarding his presentation, type them into the chat bar, and we will answer all of them after the presentation. And if you have any questions regarding ClickMeeting, our platform itself, we'll be happy to answer all of them during the presentation and after that. So I think that's all. I'm ready to start. I hope you guys are ready to start. And enjoy the presentation. I hope David is ready too. Let's take a few minutes before we start. And I hope you enjoy our webinar with our special guest, David Maldo from ClickMeeting. I'm from ClickMeeting, David from Let's Do Video.
Okay, thank you so much, Oscar. And thank you all for joining me today for our presentation on how to create and deliver an exciting and impactful webinar. First, a little bit about my background. My name is David Maldo. I'm the founder and CEO of Let's Do Video. We're a news and analyst site covering video conferencing and visual collaboration. We put out tons of fresh content on all the latest trends and emerging technologies in the space. Now, prior to founding Let's Do Video, I was managing partner at Telepresence Options, another recognized firm in the space. And that's when I started really writing towards the public, end user facing articles. And while I was there, I wrote over 150 pieces. And earlier in my career, I worked at the Wainhouse Research Analyst firm. And there, among many other responsibilities, I managed the video test lab. So I had access to all of this equipment, made thousands of test calls, learned how it all worked from the IT perspective. But that's when I really gained my appreciation that we needed to make this stuff a little easier to use, a little more user-friendly for everyone. So I've given plenty of webinars, but everyone starts somewhere. And I'll never forget my first webinar. The point is, I probably could have used some of the best practices that I'm about to share with you. I thought I was prepared, but I guess I wasn't as prepared as I could have been. Because when it was time to start, I got so nervous. And I started talking so fast, I couldn't even do it now if I tried. I sounded like a cartoon character. And I didn't notice for a minute or so until I looked on the screen and saw the video of my co-panelists, my friends, and they were all looking at me like, oh my goodness, David, slow down. So I caught my breath and I slowed down, and it was fine. It's not like it was a career ender. The point is, it could happen to anyone. And with best practices, we can eliminate those things. Presentations are stressful enough. So today we're going to talk about a few things. First, I'm going to talk about some usage trends, because I have this theory that we're going to be seeing a lot more webinars in the next few years. And a lot of people who never presented before or never thought of themselves as presenters might be delivering some of these webinars. So I want to kind of back that up for you. And then that'll explain why we need these best practices, which will be the bulk of this presentation. Those best practices basically are being comfortable with the platform that you're using, getting your idea together, your message that you want to get across, the presentation itself, your actual performance, getting through that big event day, being interactive with your audience, that's a very important part of it, and building the audience in the first part, getting people to show up and listen to you. So before we jump in, a quick poll. Oscar, can you get the poll going here? Great. So I want to know your experience with webinars. Maybe some of you have never held a webinar before or just don't do it very often, and some of you might be webinar vets doing them all the time. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. And the idea is by learning more about your experience with webinars, I can sort of maybe adjust the rest of this presentation to make it more interesting from you. So Oscar, can you bring up the results? I think it takes a minute to get the results up here.
We are still collecting the results, David. So let's give our attendees few
Okay.
more moments, and we'll be ready to display the results. Okay?
Okay, great. So we'll give everyone another minute or so, just trying to get an understanding of how many of you are experts that are looking for some maybe advanced tips, and some of you who have never given a presentation before and are looking to get comfortable with that first presentation. Okay, and it looks like we have a good mix here. It looks like a quarter of you have never held a webinar before. So that's great. I'm going to try to keep this thorough, and so it'll be a complete resource for you. After we're done, you can get a copy of this deck, and there's some slides in there that'll be nice checklists to go through them, and that way you'll feel like you have everything in order for your first one. And we do have some power users here. We have 10% of us have held 9+ webinars in the past year. Now for you, some of this is going to seem like a bit of a refresher. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I still think some things might be helpful. And again, even the things you know, it might be nice to have nice little checklists for your next webinar. So thank you all for that. And let's get into our trends. If you look at the Google Trends for webinars for the last 10 years, you see a pretty steady rise. And that's impressive considering that for a lot of that time, webinars were hard. They were expensive, they required a lot of support, they were complicated, they were very stressful, yet we still keep using them more and more and more every year. That's because the benefits just keep coming in. The ROI is undeniable. Now, I think we're going to see more of an uptick towards the end of that chart because some of the barriers I've talked about, the cost, the complexity are going away. Now, another reason I think that we're going to see more usage is we have this gap. This is a survey of marketing teams. Marketing teams are some of the most heavy webinar users. And they consistently say that webinars are in the top 12 frequently used tactics of all the tools in their arsenal. But they also say it's in the top 5 of most effective tactics. So they're only using it this much, but they think it's this useful. So what's causing this gap? I think it's clearly the fear, complexity, and expense of traditional webinars. And as that goes away, I expect that gap to go away. So we'll be using a lot more webinars. Now, more webinars is one thing, but what I think is really exciting is a different type of webinar and a different type of presenter. We've had this evolution in the use of webinars. Originally, webinars or webcasts were purely for training. Someone on the team has a new procedure that everyone has to use. He or she hosts a webinar and explains how to use that procedure. And then marketing teams got a hold of webinars and took them to the next level. They went external. They saw huge value in it. Some surveys show that over 60% of marketing teams are using webinars. And that's because the return on investment is so great for them because in a way it's a pre-qualified audience. If you are doing sales, if you are a marketing team, think about it. They put out a tweet or put out something on Facebook or send out an email blast, and it's kind of going out to the world. But if someone signed up for a webinar and took the time to show up, they're interested in whatever you're talking about. They're almost pre-qualified. So follow-up from webinars has a very high rate of success for marketing teams. And marketing teams have gotten creative with it. Now they're doing product demos and other things to make the webinars a little more interesting than just a straight pitch. But what I really care about on this slide is the second half, the bottom 4 bullets. These are new ways we're using webinars that don't include a pitch. It's just pure education. You want to get the customer loyalty. You want the customer to think, if I want to know more about this technology or this topic, this is where I get the information from. These guys are the experts. And then, of course, if they do want to purchase, they're naturally going to think of you. You want to establish yourself as the thought leaders in the space, not just the salespeople in the space. Thought leadership, I believe, leads to market leadership. And the key to this, and what makes it really exciting, is this calls for a different kind of presenter. If your presentations are marketing sales pitches, well, someone in the sales department is the best person for that. But if it's thought leadership, it could be anyone in the company. It could be someone on the development team who's working on the new technology. It could be an executive who's pushing through the initiative. Basically, it's whoever has the division, who has the vision, which means it's a new kind of presenter. And a few years ago, that would have worried me. People say public speaking is the scariest thing. People are terrified of presenting. I don't want to make people present if they don't want to, but I think we've had a cultural shift in the last few years. People are more comfortable on video. If you look at consumer services like YouTube Live and Facebook Live and what's going on Twitter, non-presenters, non-extroverts, just regular people are broadcasting their lives to the world. So if I could do it at home over the weekend, surely I could do it at work in a webinar. So with that, understanding that more of us are going to be giving webinars, let's get into our best practices. The first one is to know your platform. Get some training on it. Too many studies to count on the value of training when it comes to meeting your objective. You want to have a basic understanding of the controls. Even if someone's moderating and administrating can help you out with it, you need to know just in case. Let's say there's a loud noise and I want to mute myself. I want to know where that mute button is. And you never know when you might need to jump in and help. I watched a webinar on another platform a few months ago, and whoever was moderating just hadn't trained him or herself very well on the tools. So there were problems throughout, sharing the screen, who's showing, who can be heard, nothing terrible. And then at the end, it was just a funny moment. No one knew how to end the webinar. So the presenters said, "Thank you for watching." And then they got that broadcaster smile, and they sat there for like it seemed like a good 30 seconds until they started saying under their breath, "Can someone please shut this off? Are we still live? Does anyone know how to end this?" I mean, it looked very uncomfortable. And again, not a career ender, didn't destroy the message of their presentation, but something that could be avoided and should be avoided. Now, if you can, you want to rehearse using the platform for at least some of your rehearsals. Just like in theater, they do a dress rehearsal. You want everything to be exactly the way it's going to be on the day of the event, so that way there's no surprises. And an advanced tip, if you can, try to record a few of the rehearsals and watch the recordings. That way you can see yourself exactly the way your audience is going to see you. The camera angle, the lighting, it's hard to catch it during your presentation, but if you watch a recording, that could be helpful. Next, and this is perhaps the most important thing, what is your idea? What are you here to share? Now, it should be something new, it should be something different. You don't want to do the same presentation that's been done before. But there's new and there's new. Every presentation can't be Steve Jobs presenting the very first iPhone. We don't all have that big of an idea every time. But it could be a new approach. For example, I know there have been presentations before on how to deliver an effective webinar. But I think I'm coming from the approach that now we have non-presenters. Now we have different types of people presenting, so they might need to start from scratch. I think that puts a slightly different angle on it and hopefully made it interesting to my audience, to those of you who showed up today. Now, of course, you want to do some research and back up your idea. But as I said before, you don't want to just throw a ton of stats at people, just the statistics you need, the ones that really relate. But take the time to support your idea. Now you have your idea, you need your basic structure. And a lot of people, this might not be intuitive because people think they're going to tell a story. That's what you do when you present. You're really not telling a story. Well, there's some elements that are the same. Of course, you want to start out with an introduction. You have to let people know what you're going to talk about. Once you get past that, it's all about your idea. You want to explain it, just like I explained how best practices can help people out even if you're new at presentations. You want to support it. I had some statistics at the beginning to support it. You want to make it relatable. Hopefully my little story of my first time presenting and the struggle that I went through is something that you could all, even if you haven't experienced it, you could see that happening to yourself and you could make that connection. And again, remember, it's all about sharing your idea. It's not about telling a linear story. So the introduction can be the hardest part. It could be the most important part. If you lose people in the first few minutes, it's really hard to get them back. You want to make them care right away. So you want to tell some kind of fun story, something relatable. Now, we're not all Hollywood screenwriters. I'm sure my story of speaking fast during a webinar isn't the most hilarious story that you're going to hear this week. But it's something. It's something to grab your attention, something you can relate to, and it made my point right away. And hopefully I had your attention there. Next, you want to build your case. And I'm not going to go through all the points on this slide. It's there for you if you need it. It relates more, depending on how more technical your idea is, you may need more and more support. But obviously, you want to do your research, pull together your facts, order them in a way that makes sense, and don't overdo it. If you Google a webinar adoption or benefits of webinar, there's tons of studies. I could have literally drowned you with facts, but I just got enough to support the idea that I want to get across. I think is a pretty simple idea. We're going to be seeing more webinars soon, and that's enough. I don't want to keep rambling about it. So again, you want to pick out some ideas. If you can represent them with graphics, if there's enough stats to make a pie chart or a graph, don't throw it in there just to throw it in there. But if it makes sense, those things are helpful. Now, the conclusion, again, a lot of people have a misunderstanding about this. They think, well, I told my story. Now I'm going to retell the story in the conclusion. Today we talked about A, B, C, and D. Of course, you want to summarize a bit, but it's more important than just a summary. Again, remember, you're sharing an idea, and that idea hopefully has something helpful to your audience. You're solving a problem. This is a good thing. So end on a positive note. We have these best practices, and we're all going to give some great webinars. Now, the slides, there's a bit of controversy on how to create a slide deck. There's a few schools of thought. One that's very popular now is a slide deck, a minimalist slide deck. No bullet points, just a few words per slide or just a few graphics per slide. I like to do that with some sorts of presentations, particularly presentations that are just getting an idea across in the moment. For a presentation like this, where I'm trying to create somewhat of a guide, a list of best practices, I think it makes sense to have bullet points because I want you to use this slide deck, and some of the slides are just simple checklists of things to do. So since I'm trying to provide that value, I am going with a traditional bullet point slide deck. However, you really need to balance how much text you use. You don't want to have so much text that you're just reading it. No one wants to sit and listen to someone read a slide deck to them. But you need enough text on it so that when your audience looks at it afterwards, it makes sense. You want just simple words and what was David talking about then? It needs to be what I call a standalone deck. And it needs to have enough text to keep you on track as you're presenting it. Now you might want to time your slides. You want a nice flow. If every minute or every few minutes you're switching to the next slide, it keeps your audience interested. Things are changing. If you sit on one slide for too long, people might start checking their email. Polls, don't just throw them in to throw them in, but if there's something you really want to know about your audience, it's a great way to bring it up. And again, if you have someone good on your marketing team who knows how to find some cute cartoons of little guys with green ties, it helps. It's not just cute. It makes it easier to look at and makes it easier for people to follow. It just kind of breaks things up a bit. Now, rehearsal, I think more is better. Some people say over-rehearsing is a problem. I don't think over-rehearsing is a thing. I don't think you could possibly over-rehearse. People say, well, if I rehearse too much, I'm going to sound scripted. I'm going to sound memorized. It won't sound natural. I don't agree. I think when I haven't rehearsed enough and I'm struggling to remember my lines, that's when I sound like I'm reading because I'm focusing on the script. When I've rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed to the point that I'm not even thinking about the script, I'm just sharing my ideas. Now I feel like I'm talking naturally. I think this is the way I talk. This is the way I express myself when I'm meeting with my team every day. This is a rehearsed presentation. And if you could do it in front of people, it's better. Sure, you want to rehearse so you get over the stutters, the nervousness, the you knows, the ums, all of that. But there are some things you won't catch unless you do it in front of people. There may be a word that you're using over and over again that people might be annoyed by, or maybe something, some awkward body language. And I'll never forget one of the funniest things I saw in a webinar. I was preparing a colleague. He wanted to do a webinar. So I set him up with the camera, with the workstation, the software, told him how to use it. And he wanted to read off some stats from some test results that he had me put up to his left on a board. And when it was time to do the webinar, I said, hey, do you want to rehearse it in front of me so I can give you some feedback? And he goes, no, 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 I've done this webinar before. I've been rehearsing it. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm ready. Okay. So we went live. And for some reason, I don't know if he was nervous or he just wasn't thinking. When it was the part of his presentation, we had to look at the board. For some reason, he was afraid to just turn his head and look at the board. Maybe he thought it wouldn't look natural. So we tried to be sneaky about it, and he kept his head locked on the camera, and he just rolled his eyes over to the board, and it looked really obvious. So instead of saying, And the results for test A were 13%, and the results for test B were 15%. What he said was, so the results for test A were 30%, and the results for test B were 20%. I mean, it was really funny. And again, not a career ender, didn't ruin the presentation, but something that could be avoided and should be avoided. And always use a real watch to check your timing. Time is can be tricky when you're presenting. Sometimes it feels like a half an hour, but it's really an hour, and you're going to go way over. So actually time your rehearsals. Now here it is, the big day, the presentation itself. You are going to be nervous. You are going to feel that adrenaline. You are going to feel your heartbeat, no matter how much you practice and no matter how much you tell yourself not to be nervous. But take a deep breath and really try to relax, because when you think about it, this is the most friendly audience you could possibly have. People didn't sign up to watch your presentation because they're professional webinar critics and they're here to rate your performance. No one cares about your performance. The reason people signed up is because they're interested in your idea. Your idea. They're interested in the same thing that you're interested in, and they're looking for the information that you're going to share with them. So they're not judging your performance. You really have nothing to be worried about. One good trick is to try to look at the camera as much as you can. It just gives the impression of eye contact, helps your audience connect with you. It's hard to do at first. You want to stare at your slides, but as you practice, you'll get better at it. Another thing, remember, don't be stiff. Don't try to be like a newscaster. Talk naturally. If you use your hands, use your hands. If you make facial expressions, make your facial expressions. There have been studies that show the majority of what we communicate is visual. The actual words that we say, it's a small percentage of it. It's body language, it's facial expressions, and things like tone of voice. So be yourself to get your idea across. Another thing to remember, and this relates to your audience, they don't know how nervous you are. You look like every other webinar presenter that they've watched, and people watch a lot of webinars. They can't tell. If you messed up that last slide and didn't make the point you wanted to make, no one knows except for you. Everyone thinks you're doing great, so just relax. And finally, don't start rambling. You want to keep on track. Sometimes there's this nervous feeling that I have more to say on this slide. I really like the idea on this slide, but I'm at the end of it. And you just sort of start talking around, trying to find what it is you want to say about it. If you made it through a slide, go to the next slide. Don't ramble. Now, perhaps the most important part, or one of the most important parts, and one of the most stressful parts for a lot of people is interactivity. People are terrified of the Q&A. Again, there's no reason to be scared. No one's showing up just to ask you trick questions. This is the stuff you came here to talk about. You want to talk about it. It's going to be fun. And it's okay if you don't know the answer. I do it all the time. Other presenters do it all the time. You just say, wow, that's a really great question. I need to think more about that. Can you send me your email and I'll get back to you with an answer? It's perfectly okay. And the more activity, the better. Don't try to just end it. I see a lot of people just want to close down the questions. Oh, your question is this, the answer is this. Are we done now? No. Someone they have a problem and you could solve it for them. Try to follow up. Anyone else have any similar problems? Get your audience involved. Because after all, it is all about the audience. So the last set of best practices I have is to helping gather that audience. Now, there's nothing revolutionary on this page. Anyone who's done a webinar has probably gone through these promotional steps. But I think this slide makes a really nice little checklist. This might be something you want to print out and have on your desk the next time you're preparing. Obviously, you want to take advantage of your website. Put it on your home page, your most popular page. What we generally do is either an article about it and or a little clickable banner that goes to the registration page. If you have some sort of events page, calendar, of course you want to put it on that. And generally, I don't like to use pop-ups on my website. I think people overuse pop-ups and they can get annoying. But if it's just for a limited amount of time, a few days or a week, especially if you're inviting people to a free webinar, a free educational webinar, I think pop-ups are okay for something like this. Now, obviously, social media is probably going to be your hugest draw. But there's two ways to do social media. Of course, you want to hit your active networks. And if your followers are all on Facebook and not on Twitter, clearly you're going to want to spend your efforts on Facebook. But pay attention to groups, particularly on LinkedIn. You might have a few thousand followers on LinkedIn. That's great. You post that you're doing a webinar, they'll all see it. But some of the groups I'm a member of have 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 members. So if you could post it in one of those groups, they all get an email. You do have to be careful because a lot of groups have very strict rules against promotion. You don't want to get kicked out of a group, but it's something to think about. And of course, if you have a newsletter, that's a great source, a way to get the message out. People who sign up for your newsletter are people who are interested in what you're doing, interested in what you have to share. So it's a great high return on that audience. So use it a lot. As soon as registration opens, put it out there to get some early registrants. And don't be afraid to do a reminder or two, whether it's a week before or a couple days before the event, put out another newsletter. Hey, all followers, make sure you sign up for this. Now, some advanced tips for getting attendance. This is my favorite one, is partnerships. If there's another company out there that you could do a webinar with, first of all, it might make the webinar more interesting to have 2 points of view. And second of all, you potentially double your audience. Well, maybe some overlap, but you seriously increase the size of your audience, everyone that you can get and everyone that they can get. So look for partners. Obviously, you want ones with service that complement yours. You don't want competitors necessarily. In the video conferencing industry, I see a lot of webinars that are co-produced by a camera vendor, equipment vendor, and a software video vendor. They're completely not competitive. You kind of need one for the other one to work. And it gives both sides of the story. And they both seem to get a lot of value out of that partnership. Another tip, don't be afraid to send personal invitations. And this is more for the marketing folk. You may think, well, our clients and our potential clients, they're going to see the newsletter. They might see it on Twitter. I don't want to harass them with an email telling them to show up. I don't want to look like I'm, trying to get people in the seats. It's not about that. It's about a relationship. If there's someone, potential or current client, who you talked to in the last month or so, and they're really interested in a particular technology, really interested in a particular trend, and someone in your company is doing a webinar on that topic, of course you want to let them know. You're letting them know, first of all, that you remember their interest, that your company has value in that area, and it's a nice way to make one of those many touches you need to make before you can close a sale. And finally, if you are just looking to generate a bigger audience, you just want more people to show up, more interested people to show up, pay-per-click advertising is actually a pretty good spend. It's not just throwing money at Google or Facebook. The ads are pretty targeted. The people who see them are going to be people who are interested in your topic. And it does work. You put a few $100s, you will get some more people to attend. So depending on budget, that might be a way to go. So thanks for sticking with me for so long. We're getting towards the end here. My wrap up for you is to remember, we're going to be seeing more webinars, but more importantly, it's not just for the expert presenters anymore. It could be anyone on your team. It could be anyone in your company. And if it's you, you could do this. You're probably already doing some social streaming. You're probably at least using FaceTime. You're at least used to using some sort of video over the internet. And even if you are scared, you really don't like presenting, it's okay because it's not about you. It's about your message. You have some expertise. You have something to share. That's the value. You're just sharing it. And finally, the last thing, to try to get rid of that fear, because it is scary. There have been surveys showing that people are more afraid of public speaking than anything else on the planet, more than jumping out of airplanes, anything. But try to get rid of that fear. Remember, the audience is on your side. They're interested in the same thing that you're interested. That's why they're there. So there's nothing to worry about. So hopefully some of these best practices were able to help you. If you have any questions for me, you can reach me at david@letsdovideo.com. And I please hope you check out my website at www.letsdovideo.com for more commentary and coverage of video conferencing and streaming.